In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Marianne's guests are leaders in their field, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in their own work. They teach others to develop, refocus, and grow. Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. And remember, make every moment count.
Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Today, my special guest is Stephanie-Arnold. Now, Stephanie has written a book, 37 Seconds, Dying Revealed Heaven's Help. And so, welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And we really appreciate you being here today and sharing your experience. I mean, I read your book. Oh, my goodness. I mean, there were parts of it when I was just crying, and I could just, feel the pain that your family and everyone, that was pretty much associated with that, just everything they went through. It was just amazing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm glad to be on the other side of it, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, it's definitely a story of a true miracle. And so why don't we start by talking a little bit about about you, and for our listeners, why don't you explain a little bit about, how the story began?
From the very beginning inception of life? Or
Well, maybe from the point when, you're pregnant and you're having these premonitions, Yes.
So this wasn't my first time at the rodeo. I actually had a daughter, a biological daughter, that was 18 months old at the time when I was pregnant with our second child. I have a stepdaughter from my husband's side, so she was 8 at the time. And so I was pregnant with Jacob, and about the 20-week mark, the pregnancy was fine. There were no real issues. Everything was good. And at the 20-week ultrasound, I was diagnosed with a placenta previa that was complete. So basically what that is the placenta is growing on top of the cervix. And what hit me wrong was that all of a sudden I got this terror in the pit of my stomach that I said, I don't know what this is, to my husband. Like, I don't know what this is, but I don't want to be rare in this case, and I want to be special in this case. My blood type is already rare enough as it is, which is O negative. And I'm like, I have a really bad feeling about this. And so my husband, who's a PhD economist from University of Chicago, is very level-headed, very grounded. He was a former Air Force pilot. He does not react to things before he needs to react to them. So he is like crisis mode reactor, and that is it. So he's like, sweetheart, let's find out more information. Don't stress about it. Let's just keep going forward. And then later I found out that it's a 1 in 200 risk, but because it just hit me the wrong way, all of a sudden I was started to have visions that would not go away. And they were during the day, they were at night. And I looked up, I Googled it, of course, what it was and what are the serious complications to it and what could happen and what have you. And then all of a sudden I felt that my placenta previa was going to turn into an accreta, which is what Kim Kardashian had. It's basically when the placenta marries itself too deeply into the uterus. And the complication is that you could hemorrhage, you could possibly get a hysterectomy, and both the mommy and the baby could die in the worst case scenario. So for whatever reason, that vision of me laying on the operating table, sliced open from sternum to pelvis, just everything, I felt it viscerally. So I'd be walking my daughter to school in the stroller, and we were living in New York at the time, and I would look at a fountain. It was a cold February day, and then I would imagine the fountain all filled up and spraying water everywhere, and then all of a sudden it turned to blood, and I felt my body start to hemorrhage. And I felt it. I felt my body losing blood. And all of a sudden I called my husband. I said, meet me at the hospital because I'm hemorrhaging. And we go to the hospital and everything's fine. And it would happen to me every single day. It was relentless. It was not stopping.
And it's tough enough being pregnant and sometimes that can carry its own complications, and then to have these premonitions on top of it, it must have just felt like this is kind of driving me nuts. It is
too
much.
I think also from my husband's standpoint, he was like, and everybody, my doctors, everybody, they were like, crazy hormonal chick. Everybody get out of the way. Because it wasn't just, and in their defense, I had done many tests. I did ultrasounds. I did, blood workup. I checked the baby, so it wasn't, it was just a feeling of a knowing that I knew this was going to happen, and I was this freight train out of control, and nobody was listening. And at one point, we called a friend of ours who was a fellow gynecological oncologist, and he said, and I told him my fears, and he said, Stephanie, you're not going to need that, and you're not going to need a hysterectomy, and it's a half of a percent risk that what you think is going to happen is going to happen. But in the event that you do, which you won't, but in the event that you might have to have that, I would go see a gynecological oncologist, because they're the ones that do high-risk surgeries on reproductive organs, especially if you're pregnant. That's a real high risk. So imagine I finally get the appointment after explaining to the nurse to make the appointment that, hey, I need to have this appointment. And they're like, what kind of reproductive organ cancer do you have? And I'm like, I'm 7 months pregnant. I don't have cancer, but I need to meet with the doctor. And they're like, they didn't even know how to categorize it. And finally, I got the appointment. I'm sitting in the waiting room, and there are a ton of women with IVs in their arms and loss of hair and suffering from cancer. And my husband's looking at me like, God bless him that he went with me to every appointment. Yeah. Seriously, like, he loves me dearly. But in that appointment, before we walked into the consultation, he said, sweetheart, I don't, this man is busy saving lives, and we are wasting his time, and I'm embarrassed to be here. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm not getting any answers from any of the doctors or any of the people that I know. Nobody's ever heard of having this kind of detailed foreboding, and maybe he has heard of it. Maybe somebody can tell me. If I keep talking about it, maybe there's somebody that has heard something like this before and can give me an answer, because I don't want to die. And so we get into the consultation, and the first thing the doctor said is, after I told him on the premonition, he says, have you been on the internet? And I'm like, yes, but this is what's going to happen. And I got very mob-like. I was like, look, I see you and you see me. You're my doctor. I'm your patient. That's all I want to know. So he's like, yeah. I said, in the event I need a hysterectomy, you're my doctor. You got it? Yes, Stephanie, I got it. Okay, so this is what I want you to do. I want you to have an MRI. If the MRI is positive for an accreta, again, the marriage between the placenta and the uterus, if it's positive, then I will schedule myself on the day of your scheduled C-section, and we'll just do the hysterectomy there under a very controlled environment. And I felt really great in that moment because I had a homework assignment to do. Like, maybe this MRI is going to show something that nobody has been able to see. So I do the MRI, and the MRI comes back negative. And my husband says, you should be really happy now. Everything that you've been worried about is all negative. And I said, I feel worse. I said, because at least if that was positive, then I have something that there's a plan of action in place. Before all of this happened, I was a TV producer many moons ago. And I'm not a neurotic person. I'm not hysterical. I'm very organized and very, very calm under severe pressure. And so here it was thinking, I'm going to produce the right doctors that I need in place to help save my life. And everybody thinks I'm crazy.
Well, and, you have to really think, and I'm sure you've thought about this too, but, it's that vocalness and that speaking out, and, you talk about this in your book, that really, it's what, it really is what ended up saving you, and having these doctors in place. And it's interesting, like with Dr. Grace Lim, the anesthesiologist, how she had just attended a seminar like 3 weeks prior about, AFE,
Yeah.
And she was ready to go. And I think they were just not prepared. They were prepared, but at the same time, maybe not mentally prepared for how right you were,
Right. So to take you back a few steps, I had almost given up. Well, I basically had given up. So I started writing goodbye letters. I sent out goodbye letters. I posted on Facebook if anybody had my blood type. I was hoping maybe, not realistically, that somebody would be able to say, here, let me give you blood, but maybe they would have heard something like this or hear my cry, and somebody would have been able to give me some sense of direction. And so ultimately my gynecologist in Chicago said, you know what, I can't calm you down, so why don't you have a consultation with anesthesia? And, I was taken aback because I didn't have a consultation with my first child, but they said, they're just going to go over what's going to happen. And like you had said, Dr. Grace Lim, I was lucky enough to have her answer the phone. It was a phone consult.
Yeah. And
she's a young fellow. And she had explained to me what would happen with the epidural and where I would recover and everything. And then I went for everything. I said, and what happens if this, and this happens? What happens then? And unbeknownst to me, she said she had never experienced a patient speak so clearly about what she thought was going to happen to her, had a baby before, had a C-section before, so it wasn't the fear of the unknown, and then had sought out specialists to save her life. And with that, again, unbeknownst to me, she flagged my file and incorporated extra blood monitors and a crash cart at the time of delivery, and that, I believe, is 100% what saved my life. Outside of me speaking up, it was the preparation what did that, because everything was at its fingertips. And you just, and yes,
you just kept talking until you found somebody that would the right person that would listen to you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's just like, oh.
No. It's true. No, there are plenty of people, friends now, and we're 2 years out, but friends now say, who even work in the medical community, they're like, I don't know, after the second or third time I would have spoken up, I would have continued to speak up. And I said, well, then you would have been dead. Because, at the worst case scenario is somebody would have looked at me and said, okay, she's crazy, she's hormonal, I would have been wrong, and then I would have sent flowers and said, sorry, thank you, and they would have said, don't have another baby, right? And I would have been like, okay with that. But on the off chance you could be right, it is not worth staying quiet just so that you can appease somebody else's opinion about you. If they're judging you, they're going to judge you anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's what you're feeling, and you need to voice that opinion, especially if it's screaming as loud as it was in my head.
Definitely. Well, and so things did not, go according to plan. So you ended up having to go to the hospital. And
yeah. So I was scheduled for a C-section because of the placenta previa. There's a danger that you're going to bleed, and it could cause hemorrhage and problems with the baby. So I had a mandatory C-section scheduled for 37 weeks. And at 36 weeks to the day, my husband was in New York. I was in Chicago, and I bled all over the kitchen floor. And I called him, and I said, we're having this baby today, so you need to get on the plane. And with that, he whisked away, and he went to the airport, and I got our friend and the baby, my daughter, Adina, at the time, and said, okay, get in the car, let's go. Now, I live behind a hospital, but it's a different hospital than what I coordinated my care. So I knew that if I dialed 911, I would have gone straight to the hospital behind my house. However, I jumped in the car and I drove to the hospital, and everybody now reacts like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, you know what? I had lots of premonitions, and dying in a car accident wasn't one of them. So I knew that I had 15 minutes to get to that hospital, got there, and I was checked into labor and delivery and at Northwestern at Prentice, and I was Skype chatting with my husband on the computer, and he was like, how's everything going? And I'm like, fine, but at that point the doctor had come in and said, everything's quiet in the operating rooms, why don't we go now before we're under heavy stress? And so what do you say to the love of your life? And what do you say in those last moments that you are convinced you're going to die. And I told him that he's made me the happiest woman in the world, and to please love our children and to take care of them and to love this baby with everything he has. And he at that point was still not getting it, because I think in his mind is, and the way that I wrote it, is that if he put negative thoughts out there, then he thought that it was going to come true. So he always thought there was something wrong with the baby. That's why I was acting so weird or so strange. So he kept praying for the baby, and he kept praying that there was a healthy, happy baby. And then I had to disconnect from him, and then I turned my attention to my daughter and went straight to the maternal instinct kicks in, and I smiled and I kissed her a million times, and everybody said, we're going to be back soon with your brother, and you'll see your mother in a little while. And then by the time they wheeled me out to head towards the operating room, I broke down crying because I knew it would be the last time I'd see her.
Yeah.
And as I was getting prepared down the hall, I looked at my doctor and I said, there's something wrong with me. You need to put me under general anesthesia. And she said, Stephanie, I'm not going to put you under general anesthesia. I think you're just nervous. Jonathan's not here. I think you need to just calm down. We're going to take very good care of you. I'm here for you. And that was my last-ditch effort. And I was being wheeled into the operating room where I was going to give life to our baby boy, and it was going to be the same room that was going to take mine.
It's just, and then what, just the days that ensued afterwards, because you were, they, soon as Jacob arrived,
right.
Had
So Jacob, they prepared myself. I was done. I had released everything. I was just praying in that moment. I just was praying that it would be over with quickly.
Yeah.
And it actually was. So Jacob was born, and 3 seconds later, I was dead. And I actually flatlined for 37 seconds before they were able to resuscitate me and do CPR and what have you. I ended up having an amniotic fluid embolism, an AFE, which is basically like amniotic cells get into the mother's bloodstream, and if you happen to be allergic to it, your body goes into somewhat of an anaphylactic shock. And in most cases, women don't make it. It's a very rare occurrence. It's a 1 in 40,000 risk, and most doctors in their lifetime will never experience a patient with one. My body went from going into cardiac arrest, my lungs shut down, my kidneys went offline. Your normal blood in your body contains 20 units of blood, and I was given 60 units of blood and blood product, 3 times my normal blood supply. They had delivered Jacob, they had intubated me, they resuscitated me, and I think they were stabilizing me, and that's when Jonathan got to the hospital. And at that point, his Air Force pilot mode kicked in, and they do tell you that Air Force pilots make great family members of patients going through trauma, because he went right for what's the morbidity, mortality, what does she need to do over the next 8 hours in order to make it to the next benchmark, and the next benchmark after that. And the anesthesiologist, the attending anesthesiologist came out, Nicole Higgins, and she said, she gave him all the facts, and he said, if she needs a hysterectomy, this is the doctor we met with a couple months before. And they said, well, she won't sustain another surgery right now, so I don't think she'll need it. I think we've got her stable. And all this time, my husband, I would call my husband agnostic. He didn't believe fully, but he didn't also believe there wasn't. So for him, something inside of him told him, let me give this information. Now, when you ask him, well, where'd that come from? And he is like, it was just a fact. And I'm like, yes, but you don't scream out that kind of fact without the fear of wondering if they're going to think that you're a little off by saying you met with this person before and now you believe that. And so I was transported to the ICU on life support. I was put into a medically induced coma. And about 7 hours later, they realized that I was still hemorrhaging. And they called in the doctor I'd met with, the gynecological oncologist, to come in and perform the hysterectomy.
The one your husband talked about, yeah.
Correct. And when they did the hysterectomy and they did the pathology on the uterus, what I was afraid was going to happen, the accreta, actually had started to form. So when the placenta was delivered, it left a hole in the uterus, allowing the amniotic cells to get into the bloodstream. And that's what caused the chain reaction. So 6 of my premonitions that I had, that I detail in the book, all 6 of them came true, including that I died. But then I guess that premonition went from that to a very positive thing, which is I didn't stay dead.
Well, yeah, that is definitely a very positive thing. Well, and it seems that these premonitions, I don't know if they're like heavenly sent or spiritually inspired, but it definitely was, you got everything as much as you could in order to save your life and to bring you through this.
Right. Right. There is no doubt in my mind. My husband will say all the time, because he's a statistician at heart and analytical and research oriented, he will say, the probability of you getting all 6 right in those details and everything is pretty low. Right. So he tries to placate to the scientist in him. But when the doctors are there witnessing everything that had happened months before, they're like, I don't have a scientific explanation for this. They're like, the most that they could come up with is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I said, you cannot possibly believe that I can imagine my organs combining and hemorrhaging and everything. And they're like, no, I didn't say we actually believe it. It's the only thing that we could come up with. And so as I started asking more and more questions, because obviously it's devastating, and then to know that I found the evidence that I needed in order to know that I got those detailed premonitions from a completely other dimension. You can say that, okay, there are people out there that have a sense of foreboding before having a heart attack, and they sometimes get it a day before, or they feel sick, or they feel a feeling that something's not right. But to have detailed visions of what is going to happen in this domino effect months before it happens, no, I do not believe that is a symptom of the illness. I believe that that's absolutely heavenly sent.
Oh, for sure. And and that's a very rare occurrence. It's you're saying. People don't. Even people who may be gifted in areas. Sometimes they won't even get information about themselves. So to have that information that's given to you like that, even though it's just really troubling, and you're hearing this, but it's really what propelled you to get the help and more information and the right people in play, to make sure that you make the journey back home.
We're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Stephanie Arnold. You can visit her website at stephanie-arnold.net, and we'll be right back.
In 2012, after returning home from Iraq and Afghanistan, Sean Gobin hiked over 2,000 miles of the Appalachian Trail. Recognizing the therapeutic effects of long-distance hiking, Sean founded Warrior Expeditions, a veteran nonprofit therapy program that supports veterans transitioning from their military service by hiking America's national scenic trails. Equipment and supplies are provided, as well as assistance with job placement. For more info or to help support these veterans, visit warriorexpeditions.org.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Are you an author looking for publicity for your book? If you're self-published or have worked through a traditional publisher, Marianne Pestana can help you get the media attention you require. Contact Marianne Pestana, literary publicist and host of Moments with Marianne, to create a winning plan of action. Marianne has helped authors become bestsellers and has received highly acclaimed media attention for her clients. Some of her work has received attention from ABC, NBC, CNN, CBS, Fox, and PBS, in addition to print and radio. She's a specialist in utilizing social media and her list of exclusive contacts to further the reach of your work. Contact MariannePestana.com to discuss the future of your work today.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We've been speaking with Stephanie Arnold, author of 37 Seconds. Now, Stephanie.
So you died for 37 seconds, and the amazing doctors, they were fabulous. They brought you back, and then you were in induced coma for 6 days, I believe.
Yeah.
That's correct?
Yeah.
And then, so after that, well, actually, we'll get to that in a minute, but after that, then you wake up, and now you're having to make these readjustments.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it was like hard to transition back.
Extremely hard. The hardest part I wrote in the book was, you know, and women have reached out to me about thanking me for being honest. It honestly was the hardest part to write, and I kept deciding whether to keep it or not keep it, was the fact that in that moment I didn't connect with my son. I didn't love my son. I forgot there's a baby in the story. I didn't do things to prepare for this child's delivery because I was certain I wasn't going to be there for it. So, you know, for everybody wanting me to say, oh, look, you made it through and here's the baby, they were hoping that I'd be embracing of him and say, oh, man, look at this baby. Okay, it was worth it. And it took me a couple of weeks to actually try and maneuver away from the fear that I had, or the paralysis that I had from everything that happened. Because imagine, first of all, I'm in a teaching hospital, right? And I get touched by many different departments, from cardiology to pulmonology to nephrology to I've started dialysis. I've had, you know, there are departments I never knew existed. And because it's a teaching hospital and I'm a high acuity case, I had departments with their students coming to me every single day, hours a day, asking me all these questions and saying, you know, what a miracle it is you survived. Well, that was not helping my recovery. In fact, it was hurting my psychological health, right? Like my psychological recovery. Physically, I knew I would get better, but no one knew when the kidneys would kick on or whether I'd have to be on dialysis for a year or 2 years or what have you. It was depressing. It was painful. I had a heart attack, so I had to be on beta blockers. There were things that I would have never experienced as a young mother or youngish mother, because they tell me, I'm like, what is it? They said like advanced maternal age. So I was over 40. So all of these things that I experienced just by giving birth, it's not supposed to happen. So I was in a hospital all month. I'm on outpatient dialysis. I have ports in my chest. I can't breastfeed. I can't do the things that me as a mother would have liked to have done in order to be connected to my child. And I have everybody and their mother tell it what a miracle it is I survived. Well, I wasn't looking at the miracle. What I was looking at is telling everybody, I freaking told every one of you that this was going to happen. And not to go out and be like, I told you so, but I'm like, oh, now everybody's listening to me. Well, now I have nothing to say, because now I'm afraid if I turn left or turn right and I feel something or I get another premonition, what am I going to do? So I started psychotherapy outside of the physical therapy I was in, and I was going from therapist to therapist because they were helping me with the onset, the acute trauma, the acute stress trauma disorder, what have you, but it wasn't post-traumatic stress yet. And so I had that therapy going, but then every time I'd ask them the question of how is it I saw everything months before it happened, I would get the same answer from everybody. Worry about that right now. Let's just get you out of the trauma. And I'm like, let's not worry about it because you don't know the answer. Well, then this is not the right therapy for me, because I can tell you, honest to God, that if I get a feeling like this again, I have no idea what I'm going to do. No idea, because I need to get over that and understand clearly what happened before I can move forward in my life. Yeah. So the story had initially come out as a local Chicago CBS story, and people were following the story in the beginning, and I felt it was when they asked, did you see heaven, or what did you see in those moments, or when you were clinically dead, I didn't have an answer, because I meant they gave me a lot of drugs, and when you have that kind of trauma, I believe you compartmentalize it, because who wants to experience that again? So I couldn't honestly remember anything. And I said to my husband, I said, a friend of mine had recommended I go to a regression therapist. And I'd heard about regression before, but more like past life regression. And I'm like, I have zero interest in knowing who I was in my past life. I want to know what happened in the 6 days, and was there a way to find out? And so I found my therapist, and I videotaped my therapy. And I said, and I did that primarily because regression therapy uses hypnotherapy to take you back into the moments of trauma. And I have never been hypnotized before, so I didn't know if I'd forget anything or what, so I videotaped it just to see, what would come out of it, if anything. And I wasn't hugely optimistic, and my husband didn't like the sound of what all this was. He understood what regression was, but he was like, Air Force pilot came in, crisis averted, let's move on. Right? Yeah. And I get
that's the way his mind works, though, like you're saying, he's got that analytical mind, So.
And I don't begrudge him, for it. In the beginning, I was a little annoyed because I was like, no, I want you to go through this with me and everything, because obviously you have trauma too from it. And he's like, no, I'm good. You're healthy. Let's go. And I'm like, oh no, this is going to be a long-term therapy for us. And he didn't like the sound of that, but he was just like, why do you want to go? Why do you want to go back into the fire? I said, you have your method of dealing with things. I have to purge this, because if I don't purge this, I don't know how it's going to transition into my behavior towards my children, towards friends, towards life. So I started a therapy, and I've done over 30 hours of regression therapy, and there was a moment where she finally got me back into the operating room. I was fighting it for a long time, and she had told me to go back as an observer, that this happened to already a part of me. And I want you to go back there, and I want you to help Stephanie, who's laying on the operating table, and I want you to talk to her about what you're seeing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And you see me on the tape discuss everything that I saw, not only in the operating room after I flatline, and you see my body convulse, and you see my body go through these changes and actually gag and jolt and what have you, but you also hear me say what's happening in the operating room with my eyes taped shut and a curtain up in front of my face because there's a C-section, and everything that is happening and where the people are and what they're saying and what they're doing at every moment. And I'll get to the part of the heaven side afterwards, but when I was done with that session, the therapist said, how are you feeling? And I said, I actually feel better. And she said, sometimes the validation that we get from doing this kind of therapy, because I said, how do I know it's true. You know, I could have made this whole thing up. And so she said that sometimes the validation we get from our therapy is that the patient's doing better. In your case, you have witnesses to it. So my husband looked at the tape briefly and said, how do you know there's not an episode of Grey's Anatomy in your head? And I said, you know, after I was done cursing him out, I said, you know what, lucky for us, it's on video, and let me give it to my doctors who were there to witness it. So I hand them over the tape, and I hand it to the anesthesiologist and to my OB-GYN, and they both said to me, they're like, I didn't learn this in medical school. And they're like, I don't know how you know any of this, but it's accurate.
And
which kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, but I mean, it blew your mind, but at the same time, I mean, you must have felt this real sense of validation, like, okay,
no question.
You know,
no question.
Yeah, some of this is starting to make sense. You know, even though it's got to be a situation. And I know you were talking in your book. You talk about how you saw your daughter down the hall dancing, and you know, just things that you wouldn't see in the area that you were. You had different confirmations while you had these out-of-body experiences.
Completely different confirmations from so many different witnesses that I could take with you, and none of the stuff that I was saying would have been in my medical records. So any of the people out there that would sit there and they were listening to this saying, yeah, sure, of course it could have been in her medical records. Sure, I'll give you all of that, but if you actually look at my medical records, they're not going to tell you that the first attempt at the crash cart didn't work, but the second did. They're not going to tell you which nurse actually jumped on, gave me 4 rounds of CPR. They're not going to tell you that my anesthesiologist was by my feet and not by my head, which was an unusual place to be. They're not going to tell you that my own gynecologist kept saying over and over again, this can't be happening, this can't be happening, because the woman said to me when I said, did you say that? She said, I did say that, except they said it in my head. And so there are things that I write about that were confirmed on this plane. So let's figure what was happening in the physical world that I could see, even when I was in my coma. So I will tell people that if you're around your family members who are in comas, they are there. Their spirits are there and present, because I remember things when things are quieted down. I remember things that I asked my husband, was he doing this and was he wearing this at the time of doing this? And he's like, how do you know that? I'm like, I don't know, but I went on this search and I'm like, okay, now I understand. Now I understand. You just have to accept it. And so to get to the crux of the 37 seconds, when I flatlined, I don't say that I saw the light, because what I saw was a shooting star, because in the moment of regression and the moment of flatline, I'm seeing my body. I'm 3 people. So I'm seeing my body on the operating table. I'm seeing my spirit perpendicular to my body. And then I am this observer. So I am watching the whole thing happen. Then instantly, at the moment of flatline, I see the shooting star. So that's this bright white light that just shoots up. And then I am transported into the spirit Stephanie, if you will, if you can follow that. And so as the spirit Stephanie gets into this world, I do not see buildings around me, heaven. What I see are hundreds of spirits. And I am purposely not looking down at feet, because I don't want confirmation of where I am. So I am not looking down at feet, and I'm seeing like clouds, just misty clouds, and I'm feeling barefoot, soft, white, warm sand, perfectly temperatured. You know, everything is great. The only reason I know where I'm at is that I'm seeing my uncle who had passed away 20 years before, and my grandmother on my mother's side, and I'm seeing things that they're saying to me, and that's fine. But then I am seeing people I do not know, that I do not know personally. Like in the one instance that I gave in the book about my husband's father, right? I never met him. He had died many years before I even met my husband, and there was something specific that he was wearing and something specific that he was holding and something specific that he was messaging to me, or giving me this message. And then there was this little boy in the corner that looked like my best friend's brother, but I had never met him. He had died when he was 7. And there was a message that he had given that was very specific. And I'm like, well, it's a guess if it is her brother, so I'm going to give her that message. So, and people will say, at one point when I was shopping around the book, one publisher wrote back that she didn't die long enough to make it compelling, if you can believe that.
I can't believe that.
and it was, yes, that's what she said, and she put it in writing, which was amazing. So,
wow.
So what I've learned is that 37 seconds is not 37 seconds in the dimension and time and space that we know it today.
Of course.
In a different dimension.
Yeah.
You get such a download that you can get it from a year's worth of information, and everybody's talking to you at once. And so all of this information came in very quickly and processed it, and then I gave that information to the people that I thought those messages were for, and they kept asking me, how is it that you know this? And I'm like, again, I don't know for sure, but this is what happened, and I feel like, and I explained it to my husband actually the other day, I said, I feel like I crossed over, the lines got crossed, and the portal opened up, and now there's no going back.
Yeah. Well, and I know that you also talked to your Aunt Betty, who made a comment about your mom.
Yes.
Yeah.
My mother's an exercise freak, and she's always complaining. And my Aunt Betty used to drink 6 or 7 Cokes a day, and she's like, you know what? I'm gonna drink all the Coke I want up here. And I see your mother still exercising. She's gonna outlive us all, and she's probably right.
Well, it shows that spirit has a sense of humor too.
No question. And I know in that moment, because there was another regression session that I did, that when I was talking to these spirits, they were making me laugh. And I have on tape, and I actually just posted it. When you're on the website on stephanie-arnold.net, you can look at the latest blog where I wrote I See Dead People, and after the Sixth Sense movie. And in that little videotape, I show a moment where you'll actually see some of the stuff that's transcribed in the book, but you physically see me at my therapy. And they're making me laugh because they're trying to keep me distracted from turning around. And until I turn around and I see these doctors hacking away at my body in the operating room, it was quite pleasant prior to the moment of turning around. And then you see my body completely contort and change and get hysterical.
Well, and in your book I read how you were also, during one part of the regressions, you were there comforting yourself on the table, just kind of, making sure you could be there to give that.
Well, I was, because I was the only one listening to me. Everybody else was treating the trauma and the body, and nobody was. So you picture, and the way that it's written is, taking you on this pace second by second leading up to the moment of flatline. So imagine your heartbeat beating faster in your head, and you're hearing that pulsing. And I am standing there next to my body prior to the operation starting and saying, okay, it's about to start. This is going to happen quickly. I'm letting you know I'm going to brace you. I'm not going to let go. And look at me, because you are ultimately going to be fine. But I was the only person that could tell me that, because everybody else in that operating room at the time, in real time, were busy worrying about taking the baby out, making sure I was fine. And then when all heck broke loose, they were worried about treating the body and treating the symptoms and treating the illness. And no one was talking to me. And so my job in that moment, in that therapy, to heal myself, was talking to me.
Well, and and to look back on that and realize that your spirit was there, supporting and consoling, you. I mean, I know you said at one point you were holding your hand and you could feel the pressure up until the point when the nurses came in and was moving things around. So, I mean, all that, it must have been just this another great confirmation for you on just how accurate not only your premonition is, but the support that you had, the tons of support that you had, not just from you, but kind of from the other side. I mean, you've got these family members on the other side who are, cracking jokes and keeping you preoccupied, so that you can go through what you need to go through.
It's such a great point because I never really thought about it like that, because that's what family members do, right? In moments of extreme trauma or what have you, say, let's break the tension, let's distract, because you're going to go through it anyway. So let's make it as light as possible. Let's support her. Let's hold her hand. Let's be there for her and for in whatever capacity. And then their personalities came out 100-fold. That is an absolutely accurate statement and really perceptive of you, because I never really thought about it from that perspective until just now.
Well, and I think, it says a lot about you as a person and as a soul. I mean, you have to be somebody, we're all special, we all carry light, but you have to be somebody pretty big to be able to do what it is that you do at a soul level. And then to have, I believe it was your uncle that had that message for you that was saying, hey, I'm kind of paraphrasing. I don't have the, what are you saying?
Right. You already knew. You're a fighter, and you already know what to do. Yeah.
And he's like, you got this.
Yeah. I had a very special relationship with him because he was the black sheep of the family, and he was just a fighter, and he was somebody that went against the grain. And for me, I looked up to him because he was nonconformist. And, in a moment of fight for your life, that's the person you want in your corner. And so I don't think it's a more special than anyone else. I believe we all have this ability. I just think that sometimes life gets so busy, and so in the way that we are using our logic to define what's possible. And my husband likes to quote Sherlock Holmes, now, and he says, no matter how improbable the truth might be, once you've exhausted all other avenues, and I'm totally butchering, I'm totally butchering the phrase, but once you've exhausted all other avenues, the only possible truth is the improbable one. And so we have gone through so much research with so many scientists and so much evidence behind it that ultimately my doctors practice medicine differently. The people that I'm around and the people that I talk to, react differently. And I really try to impress that we all have this ability. I mean, we've all had it as children, but life gets in the way. It builds callous over your heart, your mind, your logic, and you say, no, that's not possible. And I would say that the clairvoyance, so to speak, or the ability to see this other dimension, has gotten a bad rap. And even for myself, you look at paranormal, or you look at mediums, or you look at all of these things, and you think, okay, they're Bengalis, or they're, side circus acts. And that's not anything I ever wanted to be ever related to. And then I realized the more I come forth with what happened, the more I realized many, many people have had this ability much longer than I have, and have believed it since they were children, and have led a life that, even though it's full of surprises, it's still completely fulfilled.
Well, and I just kind of go back a little bit on what you were talking about with the doctors. I bet when people come in and say, hey, I have a premonition about this, or I have a feeling about that, I bet they really look at it much differently than anything that they've looked at before. The whole...
Absolutely.
And that's actually pretty amazing to make that kind of shift within the medical community. Here you have these people. Science is science,
This past weekend, I was speaking in front of a few hundred labor and delivery nurses, and we were talking about the amniotic fluid embolism. We were talking about the story, and they were asking me just questions about how do they take patients, when they say certain things, how do they know that it's not hysterics versus what have you? And I said, you know what, the same way that I use my intuition as whatever you want to call it, gut instinct, maternal instinct, intuition, whatever, the same way that I use mine to know that this was no joke, you need to use yours, and you need to fine-tune it. And I would take everybody's, feeling and sense. I would just take an extra beat instead of just ignoring that patient, saying, oh, that person's crazy or driving me nuts or whatever. And they walked away from the talk saying, I'm going to take a few extra minutes if a patient is really nervous. Because maybe so what? So they're nervous about having a procedure. Maybe that's the worst thing, and they just need to be talked through. So it doesn't hurt to take those extra minutes to say, I hear you, I understand it, I'm writing it down on the chart, and I'm going to let the people know that this is your concern. And it's going to be fine. Because had I known that Dr. Grace Lim had flagged my file, I think I would have rested a little easier going into the operating room, that they were prepared for a worst case scenario.
Yeah. And I just think of how this situation, this life event that you went through, how it didn't just change your life, but also, and of course you have this beautiful baby boy now, Jacob, which is fabulous, but how it really is transforming the medical community. And when you speak to groups like the ones that you've been speaking to, it gives them greater insight on what's possible. Where, like you were saying before, they probably just write it off because it's like, oh, it's not, this isn't in my science, so I'm going to,
right.
And it's not a judgment at all. I mean, because that's how, they're brilliant, and that's how their minds work. Thank
right,
goodness.
But the majority of the majority of the time they're right, because the numbers play a big part in it. Like I told my husband, I said he's like, he was good when all the doctors said the likelihood of her getting what she says she's going to get, never seen it happen, and it's less than a half of a percent. He was good with those numbers. And I understand that, and I understand the doctors looking at the charts and saying, this is what they understand, but you're also, and so I have to say, God bless the doctors over at Northwestern, because they listen differently now, and a couple of them were like, I practice differently. I take those extra moments with the patient, and I let them know that I am there in heart, mind, body, and soul. So that whatever it is, that if a patient feels a little uncomfortable or scared or what have you, that they are there to listen to their fears, and that's invaluable. And so then for me, telling my story and surviving and having the responsibility of surviving where many others in my exact same position did not survive, then I am doing my job. Because my job is to make sure that everybody knows this, so that if anything like this remotely happens again, that they're prepared, because it's the only thing that's going to save their life.
Wow. And it's more, I just see the bigger picture here on how many lives you've touched and continue to touch with this book and the information you have about it. And it's, you don't come from a woo-woo background where people are like, oh, they would kind of easily dismiss somebody.
Right.
You come from a very stable background with, with pretty much a very grounded sense,
Yeah.
So that's fabulous. Well, so now you're doing work with the AFE Foundation.
Yeah, so I joined the board of directors of the AFE Foundation, and anybody that wants to know more about amniotic fluid embolisms, go to afesupport.org. We are raising money for research and awareness, writing papers, getting, again, it's a very rare condition. It's a 1 in 40,000 risk, but the only thing that's going to help save a life is by the medical community being prepared. So the research and the education that we're doing is into the medical community. I continue to talk and tell a story, and Miranda Klassen, who is the founder of the foundation, tells about her own story and how she started the foundation. They just published their first paper. We are the only global registry, and people can go on and register their cases, whether they have lost a loved one or whether they have lost, a baby, whether they've lost a mother, whether they've survived with severe neurological deficits, whether they've there's all different incarnations in what this horrific condition can do to a person. Here it is, you go into the hospital planning a beautiful birth, and the next thing you know, you're planning a funeral, and it just shouldn't be. And so education is the only thing that we can do, and our research is going to help with that. So I sit on the board of the foundation. I am talking constantly to different groups about awareness and letting people know that their intuition is very real, and if they sense something, they need to say something. Again, what's the worst thing that can happen? What's the worst thing that can happen? You're wrong? I would have loved to have been wrong. Right? But, I would have loved.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead.
And then the very last thing that has taken me a very long time to adjust to is the fact that we are not alone, and that we have help, and we have help that's always with us, and if we need it, it is there. And when people think that, oh, that's a crazy coincidence, or I smell the perfume of my mother in a very odd place, that they realize that that's actually them. And it's taken me a very long time, relatively speaking, to finally accept it. You and I were talking just before the broadcast that, you're in Colorado, and I did a book event, and my cousin who collaborated on the book with me, Sari, she was a journalist, and she worked in Colorado. She was on camera at the Fox affiliate in Colorado for many, like 16 years. And so we were at the Tattered Cover, and as we're there, I'm like, you know what, maybe the spiritual thing is just in my head. Like maybe it was just all a lucky guess. Like, here it is. I'm doing a book tour, and I'm thinking, you know what, things are quiet. Maybe I had time to process this. I was still doing my therapy, but I was, even after everything that I had seen, I still had doubt. And I'm like, I'm still asking questions. And in Colorado, as you know, people are a little bit more granola. They're more into holistic. Yes. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I totally mean that, in a very, very respectful way.
I'm so sorry, Stephanie. It looks like we are out of time today. I'd love to have you back on the show again. I know that you had quite an experience when you were out here in Colorado, and a lot of our listeners would love to hear a little bit more about that. So we'll definitely have you back to talk about your experience out here and what you saw. And in the meantime, our listeners can go to your website. That's stephanie-arnold.net. And in the news section, you've got quite a bit of information that people can check out in regards to articles that have been written on you and your experience overall. And for all of our listeners out there, I'd like to thank you for tuning in today. And remember, make every moment count.
Join us next time for Moments with Marianne, when host Marianne Pestana brings another inspirational gifted leader to help us grow. Tune in every second Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Moments with Marianne, when the Dream Vision 7 radio network is at 1510 a.m. Boston. Or catch Moments with Marianne every Thursday and Friday at 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. Eastern Time by going to dreamvision7radio.com. To learn how Marianne started her business from the ground up, visit mariannepestana.com. Don't miss this, and remember, make every moment count.